We are very excited to share with you about military population today and working with the military population with telemental health services. This is a topic that Dr. Quintana and I are very passionate about with our background with the military, which we'll each tell you more about today. I am a counselor, educator, and supervisor. I'm also a licensed professional counselor. I practice in Virginia. I am a military spouse of 12 years now. My husband's in the Navy, so I've gotten a really up close and personal look at the challenges that the military service members face, as well as family members and spouses. So having practitioners and providers that can work with this population specialty is really important. And understanding the military culture is super important as with working with any population, because you can make that initial connection with the clients and build a positive working relationship with them if you can do that in a culturally competent manner. And then the other piece is the telemental health piece. And as you all know, with COVID, telemental health has become so important. So being able to utilize that platform or working with service members and their families is especially important in this day and age. Dr. Quintana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Tequina Quintana, and I'm also a counselor, educator, and supervisor. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I practice in the District of Columbia. I'm also the co-owner of Transformation Counseling Services, where we provide telemental health counseling services to an array of clients, including military populations. I'm an approved clinical supervisor and a board-certified telemental health counselor. And I'm also a military spouse. My husband is in the United States Air Force, and I'm also a service member. I'm in the United States Air Force Reserves.
Okay, so if any of you all here want to introduce yourselves and tell us about what you're interested in as far as working with the military population or your experience in that area, or questions or curiosities that you have with working with service members and their families. You can go ahead and jump in.
Good morning. My name is Monica, and I'm a mother of an active duty military service member in the Army, my son, and who will be married next year. And she is not a military background family. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, art therapist, who has actively volunteered at our local VA to work with individuals who are recovering from surgeries, as well as veterans on respite care or additional work. So I'm very curious and interested in supporting our military going forward. And so I appreciate everything and gaining knowledge from you guys. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and feel free to jump in with any of your personal or professional experiences today that you have. Anybody else want to share?
There's some in the chat mentioning there's military spouse. Let's see.
Oh, cool. We got a lot of good background here. So we want you guys to participate as much as possible. So be sure to jump in, because the more personal experiences that we can hear about, I think it's better for this presentation. Anybody else want to introduce yourselves before we move on? Okay. So today we'll talk about what makes the military population unique, the different cultural characteristics especially, and how this culture might affect the way that you interact with your client in a telemental healthcare setting. We'll talk about best practices for counseling service members remotely, and then we'll talk about more advocacy that we can engage in and that's needed so that service members and their families can have more access to telemental healthcare. So here are some of the common mental health issues faced, especially by service members. depression, suicide. We hear about suicide so much in the media right now, with the amount of active duty and veterans who are committing suicide. And recently the Department of Defense released numbers for military spouse suicide as well. So that got a lot of press recently because no one had really thought about military spouses or seen numbers about how spouses were also committing suicide and at risk for suicide. This is really interesting because it brings up the question of, are military spouses getting the mental health services that they need? Is there a stigma associated with receiving those services like there is with active duty? And, you know, spouses aren't going out into combat, but they're experiencing a lot of challenges that the military lifestyle brings, like service members do. And so are they getting the attention and the support that they need as well, as far as their mental health? PTSD and TBI, also hear a lot about that in the media associated with active duty and the veterans. And then military sexual assault is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. This too with service members who identify as LGBTQ, they are at higher risk for sexual assault and need supportive services most definitely in this area. When I think about military culture, I like to think about the parts that we can easily see. If you were to watch a movie and you saw service members in the movie, you would see them in uniform. You would see them out on the battlefield. These are all aspects of military cultures that are very visible. But then underneath this waterline here, there's invisible aspects of military culture. Maybe that pressure that service members put on themselves, the warrior ethos, where they feel like they have to kind of be solely focused on the mission and to the point where they would give their life to die. This is something that they're invited to do and asked to do by the military. But as mental health counselors, that's something that's concerning to us because that type of mindset, then you're not really thinking about your mental health or your self-care because you're so focused on the mission and doing whatever you can to accomplish that mission at whatever cost. Another visible part of military culture is the language. And I found this language dictionary. Learning the military language is almost like learning a foreign language because there's so many acronyms and terms that civilians might have no idea what's going on. If you have a service member in your office and she or he starts using this terminology and you're like, what's going on? And that's going to interrupt your session and everything. So being familiar with those right off the bat can be really helpful with building the counseling relationship. Here's the dictionary here. And I will show you how to find all this up. See all of these terms here? These are terms that people in the military are using on a regular basis. And they love it.
Sorry, and depending on the branch you're in. So there's terminology that they use in the Navy that they don't use in the Air Force and vice versa. So even knowing about the specific branches is important as well.
And if you have, for example, a service member comes in your office, you're definitely going to hear the term PCS at some point in your session. So that's one of the biggest stressful factors for military when they have to move to a new location. Anything from any of these acronyms that might come up. So being familiar with them and not being like, wait a second, what do you mean by PCS? That's going to be very difficult if you have to say something like that in a relationship. So being familiar beforehand so you can at least have a good idea of it and it doesn't slow down the relationship building process with your client is key.
Also, depending on your military status. So for example, I'm a reservist and my husband is active duty. And so there are different things that we come in contact with, even though we're a part of the same branch. So just again, not making assumptions or just because someone is in the reserve and they're looked at as a weekend warrior doesn't mean that they don't go on deployment or have TDYs, which is another acronym, or longer term duties that they may have to engage in or be responsible for. So as Rebekah said, just making sure that you kind of understand these things beforehand and to not go in with assumptions.
And this is a video of a family member talking about her experience with counseling and the struggles that she had with the language barriers with one of the providers that she was using.
some of the other experiences that we've had, the very few where we've had bad experiences, were just that there was no understanding of what we were facing. So it was almost as if we were speaking foreign languages. So trying to overcome, I guess, that, communication difference, were probably the only times that we have struggled would be because of, that difference of understanding. And sometimes, depending on the situation, it was just too difficult to try to take the time to teach them when you were going to them for help. So there were a couple instances that we did change providers at that course, just because it was frustrating, because they didn't have an understanding of what we were experiencing or what we had experienced at that time.
All right, so you can see the importance there to the military service member and their family of
Some of the other experiences.
Okay. Okay, so in addition to these visible aspects of culture, there's also the invisible aspects. The strong sense of rules and regulations that service members have that they have to follow. This is a really stressful situation for someone who feels like if they aren't doing something a certain way, they're going to be penalized for it. If they're penalized for it, they're not going to advance in their career. They don't advance in their career, that's going to turn into a financial difficulty for them and their family. So there's a lot riding on every rule and regulation. And that becomes very internalized for service members and their families as well. I remember living on a base in Japan, and there was a big issue with the grass. If the grass was a certain height, then you could get in trouble for it with the base, and someone would go tell your spouse's boss about it, and your spouse is going to get in trouble. So this became a huge stressor to spouses. When their spouse was deployed, they had to maintain the grass to a certain length. One spouse was, trying to mow the grass, and it's of course downhill, and she ran over her foot with the lawnmower. It just becomes a lot, and it permeates every aspect of your life. Another aspect of invisible culture is the self-expectations. Service members will be taught to set very high expectations for themselves, and they will work themselves to the bone to try to reach these expectations. Going hand in hand in that is a self-sacrifice, doing everything that you can for the mission, no matter what it means for yourself, because the mission is the ultimate goal, the ultimate, mindset that everyone is working towards, which makes sense because, I have to remember that my husband is trained and dedicated and swore an oath that if someone tells him to go into battle, he's going to go, he would die for his country. And that's the way that he kind of approaches his everyday life, even if he's going, into the office. He has that same mindset embedded into his mental approach to the world at this point. It becomes so much of a part of you and your identity, this self-sacrifice. And then I found a video here that really illustrates pretty well this idea of the iceberg and this invisible and visible cultures cultural pieces that go along with it.
Above the waterline are aspects of a culture that are explicit, visible, and easily taught. The surface culture is where behaviors, customs and courtesies, and traditions are more easily seen. For the military culture, this area includes things such as the uniform and rank, the salute, the playing of the national anthem before commanders' calls and movies, the POW ceremony, the honoring of heroes, and the change of command ceremony. At the waterline is a transition zone where the observer has to be more alert, the area where implicit understanding becomes talked about and where ethos is codified into creed. At this level of military culture are found the service creeds, the core values, and the oath of office. Some of what identifies service members and veterans as belonging to the military culture are not readily apparent and exist below the waterline. Below the surface is the hidden culture, the more enduring and powerful characteristics of the military culture, the beliefs, habits, values, assumptions, understandings, and judgments that affect the culture's worldview. These intangible values and guiding ideals that are mostly acquired while in uniform and are often kept for life are referred to as the military or warrior ethos. These are often things a member knows but cannot easily articulate. The hidden aspects of a culture are not taught directly.
Okay, and I think they made a really important part here is that these things last for life, which becomes an issue when a service member separates from the military, whether it be separation or through retirement. They take all this with them, and then they have to figure out how to navigate their identity and their mission focus into everyday civilian life. And that is where you get a lot of the mental health issues there when that doesn't go as smoothly as expected or hoped for that veteran.
And so a perfect example of that, for example, we know someone who recently retired from the Marine Corps, and he has been married for 20 years, but he was also in the Marine Corps for 20 years, so the length of his marriage. And so his wife had mentioned that she had become so accustomed to him coming and going throughout the 20 years that now that he is retired and home full time, it's almost as if it's a brand new relationship. And so she asked him to get a part-time job so that he's not home all the time. She's working from home due to COVID. But he also mentioned that reintegration was not as easy as he thought that it would be. He kind of underestimated what that process would feel like. And so, yes, as Dr. Cole mentioned, those types of transitions can definitely cause or create or add to, concerns and issues that may warrant some additional support regarding mental health.
Yes, for family members too, because they are also transitioning from kind of the military community and having this cultural connections with others around them into civilian communities who may not understand the experiences that they've had, and they feel like they're almost in a foreign country sometimes when they have to navigate civilian culture. How do I make a doctor's appointment? How do I get my groceries at a civilian grocery store? These are things that they've never had to think about before that they're now facing. All right, Dr. Quintana is going to talk a little bit about military families now and the different aspects of culture involved with them and the challenges that they face as well.
So some years ago, I used to work as a school counselor on an Army base. So I worked with the Department of Defense for a while. And so one thing that I noticed that impact not only just the service members and the spouse, but the children, the families in general, was those unique transitions in which the families experience. And so those main transitions that we often see when we talk to our service members and our spouses and families is the deployment, the relocation or the PCS, or the separation and reintegration into civilian life. And so that deployment period where the service member is moving from their home installation and they are being located sometimes outside of the continental United States to different territories for the purpose of combat or increased security or war, etc., can really take a toll not only on the service member, but the family that is left behind. Sometimes families are trying to create and understand a new normal. Children are trying to become accustomed to what it's like to live essentially in a single parent household. The spouse that remains behind may have to take on new roles, including employment or things that are necessary to keep the family together and keep the family going while the service member is away. And that can definitely impact the family and mental health overall. Then there's also relocation and having that permanent change of station where the service member and the family moves from one duty location to another. And that can also come with a lot of baggage, both literally and figuratively. So again, having to pack up your whole entire life, sometimes depending on the branch, every 2 to 3 years, maybe even 4 years, having to uproot yourself and your family. And of course, people will say, well, you joined the military, that's the expectation. Okay, great, but that doesn't make it any easier. And some people are more resilient than others. But again, having to end relationships, start new ones, find new jobs, find new schools for the kids and extracurricular activities. Again, all of that it can be a taxing process mentally. And so oftentimes, many of my students and families came to me on the base for support regarding relocation and really helping children and spouses sometimes in getting acclimated to the new environment. And then, of course, as Dr. Cole and I just mentioned, the whole separation and reintegration piece. Sometimes service members can separate from the military for various reasons. Maybe their contract is up, their term is up, and they decide not to re-enlist. Other times it could be due to medical reasons. It could be for retirement, as I mentioned the story previously. So there are different reasons why individuals separate from the military. And of course, as Dr. Cole just said, because I don't want to sound repetitive, that also comes with a whole host of challenges in trying to reintegrate and relearn. Some service members go into the military straight out of high school, and so military is all they know. Others may opt to go to college first and then enter the military, maybe on the officer side or the enlisted side, whatever they choose. But again, if you're in there, especially for a long period of time, coming out and trying to relearn that civilian world around you can be difficult, especially if you entered at one time period and you're exiting during a totally different time. So for example, the service member who was in the Marine Corps, he entered the Marine Corps in the 90s before 9/11. So coming out now in 2021, it is an entirely different world. And of course, he's seen changes as a service member on the military side, but coming out as a civilian is very, very different. And so, of course, all of these unique transitions can definitely take a toll, not only on the service member, but the family and the children as well, and the extended family members. Sometimes we have service members who are single, they're not married, and oftentimes they have to involve extended family members to help and support them. So I knew children who had to stay with grandparents, aunts, and uncles if the parent had to go on a deployment. And so sometimes that extended family member had to move either to that base where the family was located, or that child now has to be taken out of the school and has to move wherever that extended family member is so that they can get the care that they receive. So all of that in itself can be taxing and bring about a lot of challenges that may require some additional support from a mental health professional. In thinking about career, trying to, and I mentioned this lightly, sometimes there's an assumption that just the service member is the person that's bringing in the money, bringing in the bread, and that the spouse is just there to really keep the house and the children, and that's not necessarily true. Oftentimes military spouses have their own careers, like Dr. Cole and myself and so many others, and oftentimes when we have to relocate with our families, or if there's something happening and we need to kind of step up, that means that our careers are being placed on the back burner as well. So because it's our family is first, or that mission kind of comes first. With mental health stigma, as Dr. Cole mentioned in the beginning, there is a huge stigma regarding mental health services in the military. Oftentimes, because military service members and their families may feel like this can impact the service member's career, because receiving services may be looked at as weak, as that individual being weak. Oftentimes, you'll find that some service members aren't necessarily open to receiving these types of services. So as a school counselor, I found that many of the service members, when I had to get informed consent, many of the service members were reluctant for me to even provide school counseling services. So I wasn't even a therapist. I was doing academic, social emotional, and college and career readiness services. And many of the service members who didn't necessarily understand that thought that I was diagnosing, they thought that I was prescribing medication. They really didn't understand my role. And so sometimes there was this difficulty, especially when you have a student who may be dealing with, let's just say, effects from a recent relocation or PCS, who may need to talk to me. The service member, the spouse, may be really reluctant in having them come and talk to the school counselor, because they felt like if the student told me what was going on, that I would then go and report it, and it would impact their career in the military. Outside of the school piece with the children, service members themselves may talk themselves into believing that, you know what, it'll be okay, I'll be fine, I'll get over it, I have to be strong. Other times they may not even want to even talk about it because, again, they feel like that information is going to get back to or get into the wrong hands, and it can jeopardize their career in the military. Oftentimes there is difficulty accessing services, although there are a plethora of resources that are available, from the VA to services on the base. They're becoming more and more talked about. But in the past, especially, service members have had difficulty in really finding services and really feeling uncomfortable in asking about these services. So now I'm finding that the military is a bit more open about counseling services, how to locate these services, and even confidential non-medical services through various agencies that work with the DoD and provide these free sessions for service members, their children, and their spouses to no cost. And of course, that information does not leave that agency and move on to DoD or any commander or powers that be, so the service member can feel safe in seeking those types of services.
I was thinking today, it's funny because when you get counseling in the military, that means you do something wrong and you have to go to your boss. That's the term for it in military language. It's bad. That's like the worst thing that could happen to someone, is they have to get counseling. All right, well, now we have that same word counseling, in our profession, which means mental health support. So you can see how it would automatically be confusing or intimidating to a service member to say they're seeking counseling or to even want to seek counseling. And that's part of the advocacy piece I think our profession needs to tackle now and in the future, is kind of changing, maybe even working to change that language in the military of using that term counseling, not to be punitive, but to come to mean support and needed support, and something that's encouraged. Okay, so let's talk about service members in telehealth. So studies have found that when service members engage in telehealth mental health, there's equal treatment satisfaction. They report that they like it or appreciate it just as much as they do when they have in-person counseling. There's also been found to have equal treatment outcomes. So same outcomes as if you see them in person or through telehealth. And this is done mostly in studies with veterans. But we can think about it in terms of service members as well. Telehealth is really great because it adds flexibility, time and flexibility, because service members are so busy all the time. It's hard for them to have any time to take out of their day to go and get counseling. But telehealth, they can do it at their desk, they can do it at lunchtime, and that takes away that barrier and challenge. Location as well, they can get counseling services in their office, on their ship. My husband, for example, he could not get a regular counseling appointment when he was working on a base. He says, I can't tell my boss that I have to leave every single week for a medical appointment. He didn't want to tell his boss that he was receiving counseling. But now that he is working from home because of COVID, he has his regular counseling appointment every week. It's no big deal. He gets it done. It's amazing. So hopefully that more flexibility in the future, if we can get more use of telehealth with service members, then they will start using it more frequently and more willingly, and they can have more privacy and confidentiality that way. They don't have to be seen walking into the counseling office on base, which some of them might be hesitant to do because of that stigma that does exist. So they can kind of have more privacy sitting on their phone in their car, meeting with their counselor, rather than having to go to a certain office. Speaking of flexibility, there's also a study done in 2014, even that long ago, where they had in Afghanistan, they set up monitors in an office because they couldn't fly the counselors overseas. They just put monitors in the office, and they had the service members come into the office, sit down at the computer, and have their counseling session with someone who was over in the States. So great option for the service members in Afghanistan to have access to this resource. And you can kind of think about what it would be like to be sitting behind the computer counseling somebody who's in Afghanistan, and what kind of skills you would need to use and navigate. You've probably been learning about those skills right now as you've been seeing your clients online because of COVID. So it's great that COVID is really pushing us to develop these skills that we can use, like what's the situation with those in Afghanistan. Imagine back in 2014, the people sitting behind the computers, this is all new to them, a new concept to them, but now they have all kinds of tools and resources to really develop that relationship and navigate the distance, and it's more of a norm now. Telehealth can also provide consistencies during transitions that Tequina was talking about. If I move from one military base to another within the same state, I can keep my counselor. A lot of the spouses that I've talked to say that's the most frustrating part of receiving services, because they move to a new area. It takes some time to find a new counselor that they like. Once they do, it's like, all right, well, 6 months later, I'm moving again. So Telemental Health provides some opportunity for consistency for spouses and service members to kind of keep that relationship going that's working, and provide them the support they need during those transitions, which cause them much stress, packing up, moving. These are all different life changes, and to be able to have that consistency with a counselor can be really key.
And even outside of relocation, as Dr. Cole just mentioned, for spouses who are left behind due to deployment, who now have to take on additional responsibilities as the only parent in the household. So not having that flexibility to get up and go to a counseling session, they can also engage in telemental health services with a professional counselor from the comfort of their own home. So it definitely provides that consistency there.
Yes, because childcare is a huge issue with spouses. And so not having to find a babysitter and having to pay a babysitter, you know, so that you can go to counseling, or you could do counseling in the evening when you put the kids to bed. I think that's going to be really key in helping to get more accessibility for spouses as well.
So best practices. I know it's not on this slide, and it's probably not on the second one, but I wanted to kind of reference a conversation that I had with Counseling Today back in November for their military or veteran edition issue that they put out. And one of the things we talked about was the fact that a lot of times civilian counselors, so those who may not be familiar with military culture, often assume that PTSD and TBI are like the only issues in which service members may deal with. And that's not true at all. A service member can come and see you for a range of issues. It could be for marital issues. It could be for work issues and transitions. It could be for depression or anxiety. So it's important to not assume that every service member that comes to your office or comes to see you is coming to you for issues related to PTSD or traumatic brain injury. Confidentiality, as we mentioned before, is very, very important. Right, along with civilians who just don't want their business out there, and it shouldn't be, because legally, right, we have to ensure that we are following those rules and regulations around confidentiality for service members. It's even more important because, again, that stigma is there. And so there's certain information that the service member may not necessarily want to get out because it may impact their lives. And so when we think about the military, it is culture in terms of it kind of dictates the service member's entire life. It's not a 9 to 5 where a civilian can separate their job from their home life. So this is their world. And so it's really important that we do a great job, whether civilian or a service member or spouse, that we're doing what we need to do to ensure that that confidentiality piece is there. So not only in just the setting in which you're providing the services. So many of us are working from home. You don't want your children running around in the background. You don't want to be in Panera or Starbucks trying to hold a counseling session. So not just in setting when we think about confidentiality, but also in documentation and everything else that we do as counselors, right? So you want to make sure that you're using a secure platform. You want to make sure that you're not FaceTiming clients. I've heard of people say that, yeah, well, I just see my client on FaceTime. Well, that's not secure, right? So you want to make sure, and Zoom as well. If you don't have like the paid version, it's not HIPAA compliant. So you want to make sure that when it comes to your documentation as well as your session, that you are using, whether it be Simple Practice or Doxy.me, you are utilizing a platform that is secure. You also want to make sure that that informed consent piece is there. As I mentioned, The service members that I was working with wasn't necessarily familiar with the role of the school counselor. And so that's where that informed consent piece came in, really allowing them to understand the role, your role as a counselor, the risks, the benefits, the limitations of the counseling relationship, the expected outcomes, your therapeutic approach, et cetera. I think those things are very, very important to have. Those conversations are very important to have in that first session to ensure that that service member understands the nature of counseling. Like Dr. Cole said, counseling in the military, that word counseling is looked at as bad. And with counseling services, as we understand it, having that stigma attached to it, this informed consent piece is going to be of the utmost importance, right next to that confidentiality piece. Ensuring that when you're establishing your therapeutic alliance, that your service member client understands what their role is and what your role is as a counselor. And depending on your theoretical orientation, whatever it is that you are utilizing, that could be different depending on that orientation.
Also, the hierarchy piece in the military culture is important here because the client might come in as seeing you as an higher up in the hierarchy than them. And so this idea that the hierarchy doesn't exist in the counselor-client relationship might be new to them, and it might take a little bit more explanation than with the civilian client to help them understand that and feel comfortable with it. And to keep on processing that through the counseling relationship, checking in about it, like being aware of it, what's happening there as far as your relationship and the roles might be shifting, not shifting, they need to shift. That's a really important when you're working with a military client.
And also, because you definitely made me think of hierarchy as well in terms of rank, right? We know that there are different ranks. There's the enlisted side and there's the officer side. So of course, being able to navigate that as well is going to be very important. I'll tell you that I've had experience where I've had clients who were officers and they were not able to necessarily turn that off. And those experiences I did not have with my clients who were on the enlisted side. So it's definitely important to understand that rank structure. And then of course, the specific job may be of importance too. That may also give you some insight or window into what those clients may be experiencing. Someone who's a part of the intelligence community is not going to experience the same thing or have similar experiences as someone who may be in infantry or someone who may be on the medical side or someone who's in JAG. So I think those pieces are important too, especially when we think about the intersection of cultures, which I'll talk about more in just a second. With billing and reimbursement, again, money and resources and having those types of conversations, that's typically a conversation you would have in your consultation with your client. However, some of our active duty service members have TRICARE. Some of our reservists and National Guard members opt to have TRICARE Select, or they may have their own personal insurance if they have a full-time job somewhere else and they already have that insurance. Some are doing private pay. Other services may be free. So if you're going through Give an Hour or another one of those organizations that provide free services from professional counselor volunteers, of course, Magellan and other agencies that have contract with DOD, they provide MFLAC services, so that military family life counseling, that is also free. And so if you are an MFLAC or thinking about becoming an MFLAC, you may meet with your clients, which currently now they're still doing it. They've been meeting with their clients over the computer, so utilizing telemental health services. So it's really important to have conversations about what billing and reimbursement looks like, because of course, even outside of the military, on the civilian side, sometimes costs and fees can be a barrier to receiving services. So if there needs to be a conversation about sliding scale, if there needs to be a conversation about out-of-network expenses and being reimbursed partially, fully, or not being reimbursed at all, those conversations may typically happen in your consult session, but it's definitely an important piece of this process.
And some clients will want to pay cash because they don't want any trace that they came to counseling. Mm-hmm. So they might have TRICARE, but they'll pay cash. So it's important to understand why, because it relates back to that stigma, and maybe processing that early on in that conversation about billing and reimbursement might be really helpful as far as kind of understanding their mind frame and their mindset and continuing to process that throughout the counseling relationship.
For sure. And I've had conversations with service members and spouses about just referrals in the community for those counselors who do provide services specifically to mental services to military individuals. So when I worked in the schools and the support that was needed was outside of my scope, and I would have to refer out, technically, I'm supposed to refer out to services that are on the base. Of course, though, however, you had some service members who did not want to go that route again because they did not want that information to be traced back, or they didn't want anything to ever come up. And so they opted to go to someone in the community and just pay cash. Emergency management is also important. We know that technology isn't always reliable. There have been times that I've used Doxy.me. A couple of weeks ago, it was down. And so I was unable to see maybe 2 or 3 clients that was scheduled during that time. It's important to always have some sort of backup plan. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped emergency management. I apologize. I'll go back one. Emergency management, knowing where your client is located. Especially when you think about client crises, right? We are not necessarily in the same space as our clients. We're seeing them on the computer. It is important that your client knows from the very beginning what that looks like. So if there is an emergency, who do they need to contact if you are not available? What do those steps look like if they tell you that they want to harm themselves or harm someone else? If they're going through an issue and you are available, what does that specifically look like? Again, those conversations should be had in the very beginning. Because of the nature of the relationship being on the computer, you're not necessarily seeing that client physically in the same location face to face. And so you want to make sure that the telemental health counseling relationship and seeing the clients on the computer doesn't cause a barrier to where your client needs help or support and you are not able to support them. You're not able to help them when they are in crisis. There are some platforms that are out there. I won't mention any names, but there are some platforms that are out there that are fully telemental health. And I know from experience that these platforms do not require the counselor to know the client's name or necessarily where they're located. You might know the state that they're located in, you might not. And to me, that can cause some issues if you are unaware of who this person is and exactly what they are experiencing. So it is important that when you're working online with clients that you do know where they are, especially as we think about client crises and other issues that may arise. Technology backup plan, there we go, we're here. And so if you are having issues with the platform in which you're using, it could be Wi-Fi. Again, we know that technology isn't always the most reliable. So if it's Wi-Fi, if it's your computer that's having the issue itself, or if it's the platform that's down, maybe due to maintenance or glitches, errors, whatever, you want to make sure that you speak to your clients ahead of time before this relationship even starts about what the steps would be for them to be able to contact you, or if you need to reschedule the session. So like I said, a couple of weeks ago, Doxy.me was down. And so I missed a few sessions. I was unable to see those clients. But those clients also opted to speak with me over the telephone in the event that we were not able to meet via Doxy. And so even though I missed those sessions on the computer, I was still able to take those phone calls and be able to support them in that way. One client did opt to actually just call me and reschedule that session, which was fine. But these are plans that we had in place from the beginning of our relationship. And so they already knew what to do. No one was panicking. We just realized that we couldn't get on. We contacted one another and we went on with business as usual. So you want to make sure that you have some plan in place because again, technology isn't always the most reliable. The last bullet on this slide talks about subcultural competency and the intersection of cultures. It's important to definitely know about military culture, and Dr. Cole and I briefly kind of talked about ranking systems and different types of jobs and knowing the different beliefs and values of the branches. But along with that, we do know that our service members and their families also come with their own personal cultural pieces and backgrounds. And so I had a student, for example, on a military base where she had two moms. And so that was kind of different for a lot of the people on the base. It was 2015, 2016, but it was still kind of very new to see relationships where there's two moms or two dads. And they also, one of the spouse spoke predominantly Spanish. And so again, that's also another piece that's there. And so it's important for us as we're connecting with our clients to be culturally competent on both sides, both the military side and the personal side, because those pieces are married, which often creates like almost like a new culture in itself. And it's important for us to be aware and really understand those cultural experiences in which our clients are being exposed to and engaging in so that we can support them in the best way possible. Next slide.
I'm working on it. Okay.
And just some additional best practices. You want to make sure that there is something in place where you're able to screen those clients. And so you may want to ask yourself if this client is appropriate for telemental health services, because sometimes clients are not. For example, you may want to ask a client about what their treatment history is. During your consult meeting, you may want to talk about that. You may learn that a client has a severe or persistent mental health disorder, and you may want to really think about whether or not the telemental health services will provide them with the support that they need, or if they require a higher level of care. So it's really important to think about screening, whatever that looks like to you, when you're thinking about providing services to clients. And of course, it could be the service member with the issue, or it could be the spouse, it could be the child if you're seeing children, but it's important to think about all of those pieces when you're screening your new clients, whether or not they're appropriate for telemental health. We talked about security. That was along the same lines of those HIPAA compliant platforms and such. Supervision, ensuring that you have support from someone who is a more seasoned professional in the field, who has experience in supervision, is trained as a supervisor, and is also knowledgeable and aware of telemental health practices, and of course, supporting military connected individuals, families, service members, spouses, etc. Peer consultation can also be helpful, especially when supervision is not necessarily available. And so there may be some other counselors who are out there that work with this specific population, or that may work with a specific population online. So it's important to build that community. I know ACA has
Military and Government Counseling Association.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the acronyms. I was going to say MCGA, right? So, and they fall under ACA's umbrella. Sometimes it's just alphabet soup, all the acronyms. But yes, MGCA is an professional association, counseling association under ACA. And I am a part of that association, as well as many others, from veterans and reservists, active duty spouses, etc. And so that would be a great start in networking and really being able to connect with others who are also in this field. They typically have presentations and workshops anytime ACA has their conference. So a lot of times the associations kind of branch out and have their own presentations and workshops and such during that week. However, with things being virtual, I know that a lot has changed since then. But it would still be great if you are looking to consult with those who are in this field, who are doing this work. That could be one place to start. Professional development, of course, that's a given, right? Attending those conferences, coming to workshops and presentations, and even some additional coursework. I can remember some years ago, there was an organization that was doing, offering professional development courses so that counselors can be certified in providing military counseling. I'm not sure if that is still available, but I know I came across that some years ago. And so there are even some programs, some master's level programs, continuing education programs at universities across the United States that also offer military tracks or extensions. So if you are interested in going back to school, or if you're currently a student, that is something that you may want to look into if this is a population that you know you want to work in. Of course, if you are doing your internship or your practicum, you may want to look for opportunities to be able to work with and connect with those who are in the military or those who have served. I know for me, in my internship many moons ago, I worked in a substance abuse clinic, and I knew from then, just based on some prior experiences, that I wanted to work with military connected individuals. And so anytime we had veterans that came in for services, they would be assigned to my caseload. Of course, I was under supervision, but I was able to have the opportunity to really get a feel for the work before really jumping in full force. So if there are any pockets of opportunities that you may have to really learn more about working in this field, I would definitely encourage you to take those opportunities and run with them. Last but not least, your state laws and policies are also of the utmost importance. Recently, during COVID, I was able to get a temporary license for the state of New Jersey. There were several states that were offering temporary licenses to those of us who are already licensed. And this allowed us to see clients in those states. I know New York did not provide a temporary license, but did grant permission for those who were fully licensed, including social workers, psychologists, etc., art therapists, licensed professional counselors, LMHCs. They granted permission for us to be able to see counselors, to see clients, I apologize, in that state because it was a state of an emergency. I am not sure what that looks like now, as I know that many states have kind of put a stop to it. Some states didn't allow it at all. Like I called the California board and they said, nope, if you are not licensed in California, you cannot see clients here. So that was a done deal, right? But there are many other states that did allow us to be able to do that. I'm not sure what's happening with that now, but it is important for you to kind of do your own research to make sure that if you see a client in a different state, that you are allowed to see them legally and ethically. I will tell you that if you are seeing military connected clients who are overseas, there is a little bit more leeway or a little bit more wiggle room, right? Because now this person lives in a different country. So I have seen clients who have been stationed in Germany. Of course, that means that I have to pay attention to my time zone and their time zone too. But I've also seen civilian clients who lived in Australia, who lived in South Africa, who lived in China. Of course, again, paying attention to that time zone, being very much aware of what the laws are, and if they allow you to be able to see those clients. And these clients were American citizens who lived in these countries as expats. But again, you want to make sure that you're following the rules so that there is no issue. Recently, ACA put up a post. I'm not sure how many of you are on Instagram, but they've been talking a lot about this counseling compact. So there are 10 states, and ACA and a bunch of other people, not just ACA, but they're pushing lawmakers to be able to approve, this bill where counselors who live within these different states are allowed to, those who are part of the compact are allowed to see clients within those states. And so, for example, Maryland and I think it's Georgia were the first two states where the bill made it is on its way to the governor's office to be reviewed. And there are still some other states that they're kind of waiting to see what happens. But hopefully if those 10 states, if those bills are passed and those 10 states are a part of that compact and you live in one of those states and you have a license in one of those states, you would be able to practice in those different states.
That's going to be key for military families who are moving around so much to be able to stay with the same counselor. Get some continuity there. That's going to be huge for military families and service members.
Mm-hmm. And just a little tidbit, if you are a military spouse and you are fully licensed and you move to another state, some state licensing boards makes the process very much simpler and easier for those of us who are spouses to practice in those states. And so I believe Georgia is one of those states where if Dr. Cole or I, if our family's PCS to a base in Georgia and we want to be able to practice in Georgia, the licensure process is not as lengthy as it would be for someone who is not military connected. We would have to, of course, produce orders and those types of things to prove that this is what it is, but they make the process a bit more simpler for those of you who are a military spouse who are fully licensed and moving place to place. So that's just a little tidbit.
Yeah, Virginia froze my license when I was living overseas. And when I came back, unfroze and moved on. It was really simple and easy. So I was appreciative of that. All right, come on. Okay, just to wrap up here, this is a really awesome resource. If you're working with military families, they have an assessment here that you can take to show you different areas of military culture that you might not be familiar with, that you might want to get some more professional development on. They have free professional development here at the Center for Deployment Psychology in the area of working with military, and they have CEs that you can pay for as well. So definitely check out this site, the Center for Deployment Psychology. It's located in Bethesda, Maryland. It's like a hub for everything mental health related to service members and their families. All right, any questions or comments? We have about 2 minutes. So you can reach out to Queen or myself anytime. If you have any additional thoughts or want to network or share your own experiences, we would love to hear from you. But thank you all for coming and for caring about military families. We really appreciate you, and the military community needs you so much because there are so many challenges, as you've heard us talk about today. So thank you for caring and for be willing to become an expert in this area.
Thank you, everyone.